They transfused horse blood to people, blew them up and frostbitten their limbs, and this is not even 10 of torture. We're talking about Squad 731, which you asked me to tell you about in the comments. The Second World War claimed millions of human lives. Some events are better known, while others seem to have been erased from history. The documents were destroyed. That's why today I'm going to tell you about what was going on in the Japanese death squad. This footman was different from the others. There were no forced labor or huge barracks. The camp had the same goals: to explore the capabilities of the human body, to understand how the body reacts to cold, heat, illness, and other external and internal factors. Guy singled out Ishii, who was also considered Satan, a fiend of murder, etc. She was born into a wealthy noble family, but his classmates just hate him. She worked in the army for a while, and then went to graduate school, where he proved himself to be a complete egoist. At night, he liked to do some experiments on equipment that had already been thoroughly cleaned by other students. But behind them, I've never cleaned it. He had bacteria in test tubes as pets. The IZ also advocated the active creation of biological weapons. He was famous for his inhumanity, so he quickly found a patron. In 1936, he became the head of the newly created Detachment 731. He joined as a major and rose to the rank of lieutenant general within a few years of the war. He was happy to receive this title for killing about 500,000 people. Several years before the creation of Unit 731, IZ also headed one of these units. It was called the Toka Division. The prisoners were taken there, all health indicators were measured, and the food was excellent. And then, as soon as they recovered, they were killed in the most sophisticated way. For example, they pumped out blood and watched how quickly death would occur. They starved me, gave birth to deadly bacteria. The squad only closed when one of the prisoners escaped and could have given away the secrets of the laboratory. The Japanese quickly closed everything, burned it, and shot the remaining prisoners. I took everything into account, and I built the building for Squad 731 into the form of a fortress. The prisoners had no name, only a 3-digit number. They were in the cell, one at a time, in chains. The prisoners were not considered human. They were jokingly called logs because it was believed that Unit 731 was built from a sawmill. Absolutely everyone got into the camp, including children, mothers, and the elderly, who did not look at gender and age, only at social status. Some women were forcibly inseminated in order to conduct experiments on pregnant women. About 300 scientists worked with the sea, who did not always act on the basis of science. I often wonder what would happen if a man's head was cut off. We looked at what would happen if the esophagus was connected, for example, directly to the intestine. By the way, everything was done without anesthesia. Because it was used for the needs of the war, the wounded were injected with plague, typhus, and cholera bacteria. To find out how diseases were transmitted, prisoners were forced to have sex to see if the disease was transmitted to the child. Sick women were forcibly inseminated. People were cut up alive from head to pubis. Tobogganings often raped women for nothing. Weapons were also tested on humans. People were taken to landfills and bombed. They arranged them at different distances from people to see when people were dying and when they weren't, which wounds can be cured and which cannot. They also put people in pressure chambers and pumped out the air. People were hung upside down for several days. Heavy objects were placed on them, stuffed into centrifuges, not allowed to drink, buried alive, poisoned with chemical radiation. Experiments were conducted on how long-lived babies were frozen. It often happened that some Japanese general would come and say, for example, "I want to see what the stomach looks like." The scientists quickly agreed and escorted the general to the operating room. One day, all the subjects were forced to put their hands in icy water, and when they'd all fainted, they were quickly put out, warmed up, apologized, and that was it. Samura did not feel such remorse, and in his articles he even boasted that he had conducted an experiment when he froze 20 babies. Do you remember when I told you that various deadly bacteria were injected into patients? So, if a person recovered, it did not exempt him from subsequent torture. He was tortured alive in other ways. No one has ever come out of the death factory alive. In 1978, Isama received the State Award straight from the Emperor's hands. No one could escape from the prisoners, because literally no one knew where this camp was located. The prisoners were transported at night in windowless cars, and they traveled underground for the last part of the journey. But one day the Russian prisoners organized a riot. One of the prisoners pretended to be sick, and when a guard entered the cell, he attacked him, took the keys and opened all the cells he saw, and released dozens of poor people. The corridors in the form of a maze did not allow people to get out. They were simply shot by other guards on the move. Despite the torture that took place in this camp, these people were very lucky. The average time that people lived in this camp was 2 months. By the way, the Japanese didn't really care who they killed. There was a doctor there who contracted the plague. But no, he was not placed in a separate cell. He was not treated. They watched him closely as he became covered with purple spots and died in front of his eyes. His last cry was cattle. He thought until the last moment that he would be treated, but they just gutted him. The purpose of the squad is to create biological weapons, and one of the attempts was made on local lives. Planes began dropping plague fleas right on the cities. The Japanese infected wells with kinetics. A few days later, an epidemic broke out in the city. The Chinese conducted 12 such tests, which affected 11 Chinese cities. In the form of humanitarian aid, the Chinese were given parcels containing Siberian Japanese ulcer, smallpox, cholera, etc. When the epidemic started in the city, the Japanese simply went to the dying people in protective suits and examined them. One day they dropped a cholera bomb close to the lying city to this detachment. Along with a huge number of Chinese, a large number of Japanese soldiers suffered. But what happened at the end? What happened to these terrible people? In 1945, the area where Detachment 731 was located was occupied by the Red Army. A decree came from above to cover all tracks and dump all equipment. 600 camp workers were shot, and the last 300 prisoners were also killed. The camp was blown up, and each worker and doctor was given a capsule with poison, which they had to drink in case of information leakage. For everything we know about this unit, we have to say a big thank you to Colonel Sanders. When he arrived in Japan, he knew absolutely nothing about Unit 731, and he arrived to study biological Japanese weapons. He threatened Japanese scientists that if they did not give out their secrets, they would be attacked by the Red Army. The Japanese provided him with a large document containing all the horrors of Unit 731, after which the Americans found out what the Japanese were doing. All this time, thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel and be happy and healthy.